How can I explain a bad work experience without bringing down the interview? You know, that's hard because one, you already don't know what they're going to ask you. And when they ask you about a bad work experience, and I'll use myself as an example. So many years ago, several years ago, many years ago, I was interviewing for a position, and I was asked, what would your last employer say about you? Now, me and my supervisor didn't care for each other. I didn't like him, and he didn't like me. But I wasn't going to say that in the interview. What I said was, I don't know what he would say about me. I don't know what he would say about me. I know that I was a hard worker. I came to work on time. I did all my work, and I just listed all of my attributes because that was the truth. If they called him, I don't know what he would have told them. So it was not a lie. So you want to be mindful, even if you have a bad experience. You can say, you know, we didn't see eye to eye, or he wasn't the best employee, best boss that I ever had. But you want to kind of keep it, like an iceberg. A little at the top, you're only talking a little at the top, and you save a lot for the bottom. You know, if they don't need to know all the little nitty-gritty details, then you don't go in telling the nitty-gritty details. In an interview, you know, you want to be mindful because you're a stranger. And if you go in oversharing, over-talking, then, you know, they're going to just take all that in, and they're going to be like, here, this person is telling me their life history, their personal history. Why in the world would I bring them to this organization? So you want to be mindful. I want to also say, too, of an example of a reference that I have also interviewed 2 candidates, and they interviewed very well because a lot of people can, you know, interview better. They may not, whether they're good or not, but they interview enough that you'd be like, okay, you know, either one of them, I'm worth trying. Both of them was referred by the same person, by the same woman. She sent both their resumes to me, and she told them to send their resumes to me. When I called her and said, who, you know, I like both of them, who would you recommend? And, you know, she said, this is the person I'd recommend. You want somebody who can hit the ground running? You want somebody who's going to be a soldier in the field? This is the person that you go with. And that's the advice that I took. Now, if that person didn't hit the ground running or didn't be a soldier, me and that person that said, yeah, I would go with her, we'd have a conversation, because I'd be like, you referred her, and then gave her a compliment on top of that, and she turned out to be trash. But that didn't happen. You know, she picked the person that she referred to is the person that we picked, and here we are. So what should I do if I'm not sure of the answer to a question on my interview? So a lot of times, especially when you're nervous, you may not understand all the questions that you're asking, and that's understandable. That's natural. People don't expect you to be able to spit things out on the spot. When you're on an interview, you have time. Take the pause. That's what I call it. Take the pause, because you are allowed a pause to think in an interview. And what that means is they may ask you a question about something that you did on your last job. You know, how did you handle a conflict? Soon as they ask the question, you don't have to blurt out an answer. Take a minute to think about it. So I'll give myself a good example. Today is just Wednesday. If somebody came up to me out the blue and said, Belinda, what'd you have for dinner Monday? It's going to take a minute for me to think about, what did I have for dinner? Let alone what kind of conflict I had on my last job. So take the pause. Don't feel like you have to fill the air. If someone asks you a question, you are not sure of the answer, you can ask them to repeat the question. You can ask them to explain what that question is, or you can ask them to reword. Don't just start talking and answer the question that you don't even know the question. Make sure you understand the question that's being asked of you. So if you don't know the question, you don't understand what's asking, ask them to repeat the question, ask them to explain exactly what they mean, ask them to reword it. Take the pause. Again, if somebody said, Belinda, what'd you have for breakfast this morning, Belinda? Well, what did I have? I'm going to take the pause because I need to think a minute to go back to breakfast. So when you're in an interview and they ask you questions, you're going to take a minute to think, what did happen? And that's not that you're trying to come up with a lie, but you're trying to think of how much, what is the answer? Take the pause. When you interview, it's okay to take the pause. Now, that not an all-day pause, but it's okay to take a pause to think, let me think. The last conflict that I had on a job. And then you can come up with an answer. Because if you start talking too fast, too soon, then you may not answer the question properly. So you want to make sure that you understand the question and that if you don't, ask again, ask them to repeat, ask them to reword, ask them, can they explain what you're talking about? And here's the tip. You can say, can we go to the next question? I'm going to take a minute to think about that. And can we come back to that? That too is okay to say. When you're interviewing, a lot of times, despite people thinking that it has to be perfect or that it has to be perfection, you're human. We're all human. So it's okay to say, I don't understand the question, or can you rephrase, or can you explain, or can you give me an example of what you're looking for? So it is okay to say that on an interview. When asked to tell an interview about myself, what should I limit my responses to? And that's a really good question, because a lot of times you don't know what to say on that and you don't want to talk too much. How I like to describe it is you want to have intercom conversations, meaning that whatever you said, if it was announced on an intercom in a huge building, that you wouldn't be embarrassed. Things that you don't want to talk about. You don't want to talk about politics. You don't want to talk about religion. You don't want to talk about anything that could offend someone. So you can stick straight to your skills. So you can talk about your skills or what you did at your last company or what you brought. If you want to talk about something personal, again, intercom conversation. So you want to stick to broad things. For example, I would talk about the weather or gardening or my pets or sports, because very few people can be offended by any of those. If I'm talking, and the reason why they ask that question. So when I ask that question, tell me about yourself, is I want to see if we have a connection. So clearly you have the skills. That's why I brought you in. You have the skills on your resume. That's why I brought you in. But I want to see if you're going to be a fit for our team. So I like music, or I like books. I like to read books, which is true. I'm in a couple of book clubs. So I like to read books. So if you tell me something about yourself that you like to read books, the first thing I'm going to say is, oh, really? What's the last book that you read? Because now we might have a connection, because maybe you're reading a book or read a book that I've already read or that I want to buy. So now we have a connection. So when it comes down to two good candidates, you and the other person, everything's equal. I'm going to go with the person I have a connection with. So when they ask you, tell me about yourself, that's the time to try to make a connection with the person. Don't force it. Just try to make a connection. So I'll give a good example. Some people love sports. Some people love the Falcons. No matter what. Win, lose, or draw, they love the Falcons. So tell me about yourself. I'm a huge Falcons fan. Even if I'm not a Falcons fan, I'm a football fan, I may say, really? Oh, I love the Cowboys. And then we're back and forth. Again, a connection has been made. So when they ask you, tell me about yourself, they're kind of trying to get a connection, but you want to keep it broad. Again, nothing that will offend anybody, nothing that will be offensive, things that somebody can have a connection with.